and welcome to 10,000 Tacos. If you are new to the show, 10,000 Tacos is a podcast about a family who ran a successful food truck business in Northern California. It's a collection of short stories of those experiences and the many lessons learned having gone through that. It's also a podcast that pays a tribute to a pair of taqueros who sacrificed tremendously to give their children a better life. I'm Isidro Salas, and I'm proud to say that pair of taqueros, they are my parents. This show is a tribute to them. Thank you for joining us today. On the show today, I want to tell you about a young lady named Maria. More specifically, I want to tell you about a time Maria took her 4 children from the home they ever knew and traveled north. They traveled north to reunite with her husband and to start a life in the United States of America. There were many obstacles in her way, and many of those were well within Maria's will to overcome. But there was one obstacle which presented a challenge that took a lot of energy, both physically and mentally. But most importantly, it took a lot of believing. And this story is about that night, the night Maria had to watch her children get whisked away by strangers she had no choice but to trust. In essence, it's a story of faith. We begin in the early morning hours in November of 1978. Maria woke up her children and instructed them to pack lightly. It was about 3 a.m. and the taxi driver, who was waiting for them to emerge from the house, was the only person who knew her immediate destination plans. Maria knew that if she told anybody, especially any of her immediate family members, she was heading north, she knew they would certainly try and talk her out of it. The journey took them from a small city in central Mexico. They would travel by bus 3 hours west to Guadalajara, Jalisco. From there, they'd spend the next 2 days on bus going north to Tijuana, which borders the United States. Once they arrived in the Tijuana bus terminal, the plan was to have all of them, Maria, her daughter, the oldest of 4, and her 3 little boys, the youngest being just 6 years old. The plan was for all of them to cross the border together and get picked up by a relative just on the other side in San Isidro. San Isidro is the largest border crossing between San Diego and Tijuana in California, and it's the 4th busiest land border crossing in the world. But that didn't happen. As soon as Maria arrived to the location, the address which she had written and stowed away in her purse, the address she had guarded so closely for the last 3 days, she was greeted by a woman and her mother. She was greeted in a hillside home in what seemed to be a lively neighborhood. They arrived late in the evening, though there were siren lights flashing in the near distance and the sound of kids playing outside. Maria felt that the 2 women greeting them was a welcome sign. But that easiness would wear off within minutes of walking in that home. The woman, who was probably the same age as Maria, quickly and demandingly told her that the kids would have to go first, and that the next day Maria would be crossed over. This woman was the coyote. A coyote is a term used to describe a human smuggler. Yes, you can call it human trafficking. Within several minutes, Maria would watch her 4 children get into the mid-70s Ford Pinto and be driven off. She stood there until she couldn't see the taillights any longer, wondering if she'd made the right choice. Maria had little to no choice but to default to truth. Truth default theory says we not only tend to believe people, even strangers, but that maybe the thought that we shouldn't doesn't even cross our mind. And that's what Maria did. Now, I'm sure she didn't analyze her feelings in that way as she observed her children get whisked away in the dead of night. I'm pretty sure that didn't happen. She then walks inside the house and sits down in a small dining table in the kitchen. The mother, we'll call her La Viejita. She had her back to her, and it wasn't intentional. She was reheating some beans and chicharrón smothered in salsa verde for Maria. La Viejita knew Maria was hungry and didn't have to wait for Maria to ask if there was anything to eat. Maria, on the other hand, she probably would have never asked. ¿De dónde eres? Where are you from? The lady asked. It was not a small talk question, Maria thought. Here is the stranger asking Maria where she's from. What should I tell her? Who is this lady? Why is she asking? What does she want to know? Quickly realizing that she was a guest and that it's rude not to respond, Maria blurts out, Soy del Calvillo. The lady turns to her and says, ¿En Aguascalientes? Sí, says Maria. Oh, sí conozco para allá. Yes, I'm familiar with that place. That reply eased Maria's nerves for the time being. This lady seemed familiar, so familiarity is a sign of a friend. From that conversation, Maria went on to learn about the viejita. This viejita had another daughter named Roxy. Maria learned that her 2 daughters were very different. She learned that the one daughter, who'd just driven off with her children, had just gotten out of jail. That didn't make her feel too good. And it didn't take long for Maria to figure out that her daughter's checkered past is probably the reason why she's a coyote to begin with. But somehow Maria had to trust. Roxy, on the other hand, was more pleasant and had agreed to help in getting Maria to the other side of the border. After about 2 hours, Maria hesitantly and respectfully asked if she could go sit down in the small couch in the living room. La Viejita softly says no, but not because she was being difficult or mean. She tells Maria that she can go lay down in the bed in the room down the pasillo, down the hallway. Having just spent little over 2 hours speaking to this lady and sharing some personal things, Maria felt that it was safe to do so. At around 1 a.m., Maria opens her eyes to the sound of a conversation she could hear right outside. It was between the viejita and her daughter, whom had driven off with her children just hours before. She had just gotten back. Maria gets closer to the door and tries to be as quiet as possible. She doesn't want to make any noise, but she is eager to know what or where her children were left off at. She hears the daughter tell the viejita that the kids were taken by another couple right after they crossed into San Isidro. Though she is relieved to hear the kids cross successfully, she is still nerve-wracked as to if they made it to their final destination. She just doesn't know. Maria then turns her attention to what the daughter says next. She's going to be my guarantee that I get my $1,500, was the response to the question, why didn't you take the whole family? Maria was stunned. Again, the original arrangement was to cross the border together, her and her children, and come to find out that she was left behind for $1,500. This was 1978. $1,500 in 1978 is the equivalent of about $5,777 in today's dollars. She simply didn't know if her husband had the money, so she begins to freak out. She also hears the woman say, "If I don't get that money, well, we'll have to get it out of her in other ways. Look, she's got a nice body. She's got a pretty face. We'll make that money back real quick." This really scared Maria, without knowing the fate of her children, and even worse, whether her husband had the $1,500. She began to wonder if someone might go into that room and start to collect. As if worrying about her children was not enough, she now had to deal with what she perceived was an imminent threat. She was now convinced that someone might just come into that room that night. Her heart begins to race. You know what happens to us when our heart rate goes up and we begin to fear the uncertain? Well, if you have to ask, it activates the flight or fight system. At a chemical level, our body releases a series of hormones that makes us hyper alert, focused, and energized. Maria was in a room, a bedroom, a strange room, no bigger than 8 by 8. That's very small. She peeked out the window next to the bed and discovers that because the house is located on a hillside neighborhood, and though it was dark, it's pretty steep. An option is to jump outside, just in case she needs to escape, but there's no telling if she'd survive a fall. Taking several deep breaths, she regains just enough calmness to notice there were no sounds coming out of the kitchen. She decides to go to the door. Slowly turn the knob. Slowly. And just as slow, open the door. She tippy-toes to the kitchen, ever so clever to keep as quiet as possible. Gets to the counter and begins to open one drawer after another. She finds the drawer with the utensils. She finds a small meat knife. Runs the blade parallel to her left palm. Just to see how sharp it is. This will do, she tells herself. Slowly goes back to the room. Quietly. Step by step. Quiet as possible so no one can detect her. She makes it back to the room, sits on the bed, her back to the headboard. She slightly pulls up her right side pant leg, then pulls down her sock, puts the knife on the right side of her shin, and pulls her sock back up. Pulls down the leg pant, and then she waits, focused on that doorknob. Focused. She waits. You see, Maria is one of 17 siblings. She was the second oldest. She grew up in a big family in a big ranch in Mexico. Being one of the oldest, she was thrust to a leadership position at a very young age. She had to learn how to fend for her siblings and protect them, as well as herself. Her dad taught her at an early age how to defend herself from wild animals and from wild kids who would try to take advantage of her. Her father showed her how to use a knife to skin a deer and harvest its organs if need be. She'd learned the necessary survival skills to stay alive for several days in case she was ever lost in the wilderness. Tonight, she was in the wilderness. On this night, whoever came through that door, well, she decided that person was going to meet fate on its period. Maria just figured if they're going to try to sell me, well, they'll have to kill me first. She was ready to put those survival skills to work. Maria dozed off slightly, with one eye open and the other one closed. She sat there, anticipating that the doorknob turned. As the sun began to rise, she felt a bit of relief. And as the roosters began to crow, which was a very familiar sound, she knew the height of the danger was probably behind her. Then there was a soft knock on the door. María, soy Roxy, la otra hija. ¿Estás despierta? Are you awake? Sí, answers María. Qué bueno. Ya mero nos vamos. Good. We're almost ready to leave. Maria takes the knife and stuffs it in between the mattresses before she proceeds to exit. She figures hopefully they won't find out until she's way, way gone. And just as she's exiting the room, she hears the phone ring. She hears Roxy's voice answer it. Sí, ya se levantó. Aquí está. As she enters the kitchen area, Roxy hands the phone over to her. Bueno? María, es Lupe. Aquí están los niños. Llegaron bien. She breathes in a huge sigh of relief. She wants to cry, but she can't. Not in front of Roxy. She figures it's a sign of weakness. She takes her right hand and covers her mouth as if she's trying to hold back from sneezing. But this is not sneezing. Roxy would go on to hand her a fake green card with a photo of a young lady who seemed to resemble Maria, and then later instruct her to say yes to the question, U.S. citizen? That's what's asked when you cross the border. And as they cross into San Isidro, Roxy would be the one who received the $1,500 that was raised in the last minute by the half-brother of her husband. One more thing. Maria is my mother. And I'm that 6-year-old. Sure enough, I remember this one day that my mother woke us up and the middle of the night, all of us, and instructed us to pack our best clothes. And I did it, okay, I didn't question it, and neither did my other siblings that I remember. And we took a taxi to the local bus terminal. We boarded a bus, and we went all the way up for 3 days, traveled all the way to Tijuana. And from there, we were separated from my mom. And I just remembered my sister looking at me at one point with this face of, I'm gonna take care of you. And I trusted my sister that she was. I didn't ask any questions because we were being told we were to shut up when we were crossing the border. I remember this lady with this very evil face turning around and looking at me and my other siblings saying, "Cállense, o los voy a matar." Shut up, or I will kill you. And of course, what is a 6-year-old at this point? What are you supposed to do? Just sit there and take it and go, okay. And we drove out. The next thing I just remember waking up at this place, and I looked around, and I just could see my 2 other brothers and my sister. And then I was asking where my mom was. I asked my sister, and I didn't get an answer. And I just could remember the smell of this meat. And I later found out it was bacon. And that's what we eventually ate. That was the first meal I had in the United States. It was bacon. I don't know if that's the reason why I love bacon, but it certainly is. But anyway, before I knew it, I saw my dad come in the door. Our face was just, wow, I hadn't seen my father in a long time. It had been months. And he walks in through this front door, and of course we hug him and we just miss him. We're all trying to get ourselves close enough to hug every single part of his body because we hadn't seen him. And so quickly we were just reminded how joy was to see him, and we were just happy that everything was happening so fast that none of us really realized that our mom wasn't there. And so it wasn't for another couple of hours that we all boarded a car and we drove somewhere, and we waited at this one place right by a house. It was a busy street. I remember lots of cars passing by in both directions. It seemed to be very busy. It was a busier street than I could remember as a kid. But next thing you know, I see my father get out of the car quickly, and he runs behind. He runs to the rear, and I see him hug my mom. And my mom obviously got out of a car that had just parked behind us. We didn't even notice. They were hugging, and then we couldn't get out of the car, but it's the first time I remember seeing my mom. And I go, wow, this is crazy. Anyway, then we all I just remember driving for a long time, and we inevitably ended up in San Jose. When I look back at that time, I just think trust is what kept my parents hopeful. Trust. They trusted one another. My mom trusted my dad, and he was going to send for us and pick us up. My mom trusted the system, however crooked that system was, to get us here illegally, to cross the border illegally. My dad trusted the people that told him that, yes, we can get your family over. I can't see myself having a life that I have today because if it didn't have that foundation of trust. Thank you for joining us on this latest episode. We hope you join us for our next one. Until then, I'm Isidro Salas, and this is 10,000 Tacos.